Hi guys, so welcome to this talk. It's called Comic Chronicles, where I'll be basically going through all the comics that I've made and giving you some tips and things that I've learned right throughout the process. So, yeah. I'm recording myself. Cool. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Britt Augustus. I studied visual communication. That's a formal study that I did in college at VIT. And currently, I work as a freelance illustrator. Some of my clients, they are like Nippon Paints. I've done a lot of work for Times of India. And as a passion, I've written and illustrated 4 books. So that's what I'll be talking about. And yeah, like I've showcased my works throughout multiple Indie Comix Fest. This is probably my 3rd one. Yeah, it's the 3rd one. Bangalore and Kochi. Alright, so what is this talk going to be about? I'll be going through my works chronologically, and I won't be teaching you any like new techniques as in like how to draw, how to write, methodologies. Rather, I'll just share things that work for me in my process, because a lot of the things that I learned right in terms of making comics were through trial and error. So yeah, I'll be going through my works and I'll be talking about that, what I've learned, what worked for me, and this will really be helpful for people who want to start making comics, want to get into narrative art, those kind of stuff. And if you have already made comics before, this will like reaffirm the stuff that you already follow, or maybe it will also give you a new perspective into how certain processes are done. Yeah, so I'll start with the first book that I've written. It's the Pen Traveler comic. As you can see in the cover, it's me, myself. It's the only one book that is it's not autobiography, but a non-fiction. It's a travelogue of sort. Yeah, so with this comic, I'd like encourage a lot of creators to make a non-fiction comic. A lot of us usually tend to write fictional stories, but there's a lot of benefit to making non-fictional stories as well, and I'll go through that. One is that the story is already taken care of, right? You don't have to come up with something brand new, and you can focus on how you present the story to the audience, the paneling, the art, all those kind of stuff. And it can be your own story. If that's an interesting element that happened in your life, you can talk about that, share it. It's more personal. And if you don't have anything interesting to talk about, you can put yourself through an experience and yeah, like tell that experience as a story, which is what I did in Pen Traveler comic. So the next thing I want to talk about is sharing your work. It's super important to share your work, because without sharing, nobody knows whether you exist or not. And I started like sharing my work. The first time I did was in Olam Fest. It's a huge event that happens in Trivandrum. So I was like not at all confident, like would people like my work? But again, I pushed myself. I was like, let's see if people like it, they might. And people loved it. And at that time, I didn't have Pen Traveler done. It was just like one part of Pen Traveler, which was the Kochi part, the first state that I visited. So people loved it. It gave me a confidence boost, made me want to like tell more stories, make more stuff, and yeah, made me believe in myself more. Again, yeah, physical media is super important. I believe like as technology got better, we got a lot of platforms to share our works digitally. But I personally do believe nothing beats physical comics. There's a lot of difference between flipping through pages and swiping through pages, right? So I'm a huge proponent of physical media. And when you share your work in person, you get to meet a lot of people in person, which is very important. You get to see their reaction as they read your comic, any work that you do. That again, it gives you a live feedback. So their reactions like help reaffirm some of the things that you thought about your comic, and yeah, stuff like that. You get to talk to your readers and understand them, what they're looking for, what their interests are, and again, you can build a social connection with the readers, which is very important. Like a small example which I'd like to give is signing your copies. You can't do that if you're just putting your comics online, right? So sharing your works is awesome, and ICF is your ally, like the greatest ally in terms of physically meeting readers and sharing your works. ICF happens like across India, almost every city, constantly all year. So it's super cheap also. You can just set up a stall, talk to people, share your works. So yeah, ICF is awesome. Alright, so the next comic I want to talk about is Space Joy. So give yourself a challenge. This comic was created based on a 5-day challenge I gave myself, and I'll tell you why it's important to give yourself a challenge once in a while. And the challenge can be based on a restriction that you give yourself. It can be any sort of restriction, like maybe number of pages, no dialogues, maybe make a comic that doesn't have any dialogues, no panels. It could be something that pushes the boundaries of storytelling. Play with the format. It doesn't have to be a book. It can be something like a zine, a folding kind of comic. That's what I initially did. So play along with these kind of stuff. And when you create these challenges for yourself, you'll be able to find unique solutions for the problems you created for yourself. Definitely, it'll help you push yourself, think beyond the box. And giving yourself restriction also helps you focus on like one element in your story, because comic making has a lot of elements, which is writing, paneling, lettering, and it can get overwhelming. So having like giving yourself a restriction can help you focus more. And again, yeah, it can help you find ideas from unconventional sources, maybe like a conversation you had with a friend, and yeah, tight deadlines, all. It will help you push yourself. And if you're an artist, you could relate to this. You often get into a rut where you don't feel productive no more. So these kind of challenges that you self-impose will help you definitely like get out of it and push yourself more. Alright, so the third comic I want to talk about is It's Lonely in Space. This is the one you can see. Yeah. So tools to use. The best tools you can use for your comics are usually the tools that you're most comfortable with. It doesn't have to be digital, traditional. And the tools I've always been the most comfortable with were the traditional tools. And this comic, actually, I wanted to push myself, try something different. And this was my first venture into digital comics. So digital tools, right? It'll help you play with colors a lot. Like you can change it after you have applied, and there's a lot more freedom of experimenting, which you don't get a lot of times when you're doing it traditionally. Meanwhile, traditional tools, this is my favorite part about traditional tools, right? It kills the perfectionist, because you don't have this undo button that you can rely on. So it's just, you make a stroke, it's done. And yeah, trust yourself more, make more mistakes, and it'll build your confidence as an artist, and also it'll help you develop a style. And yeah, it'll make you accept the mistakes. And traditional tools I've noticed is awesome if you're into hatching, or if you want to add textures like watercolors or crayons even. It gives you some textures that you can't recreate digitally. So depending on, like, based on what kind of stories you want to tell, you can like play with these digital and traditional tools. And it's always great to have a balance of both. But again, these are some awesome aspects of them. So yeah, the next thing I want to talk about is making generic comics. Usually as comic artists, when we get started into making comics, we tend to do genre bending stuff, try to make comics that are more close to us, right? But it might be helpful to occasionally target an audience and make comics for an audience, which is more commercial, which is more appealing for the wider audience. So yeah, generally we make comics that we want to read, but you could also try making a comic that the masses want to read, which is what I did with Lonely in Space. And eventually you'll get good at balancing both. Being able to tell a personal story that's genre bending, that's close to your heart, and at the same time it reaches a wider audience. Yeah. So this is Threshold of Rupture, my most recent and probably my best work so far. And yeah, I'll start talking about this. Ideas from within. It's important to pull ideas from yourself, from your personal experiences, because you have an element of confidence. When you talk about subjects that you're not too confident about, which you don't know, you come off as not being confident in your work. But pulling it from yourself helps you be more confident. You know it's true, right? And you could talk about your opinions and views, what you believe, your belief system. But when you do that, make sure it's very subtle. Readers really do not like being preached. Make it subtle. You can use a lot of symbolisms, analogies, metaphors. If you directly tell what you believe, they might not accept it. But if you are subtle enough, they won't realize that they accepted it and they're cool with it. Yeah, again, telling subjects about unfamiliar subject is much more harder. If you're going to do something like that, you'll have to do research. But if you directly pull from yourself, from the experiences you had, it's much easier. And it's really useful when it comes to conveying emotions. A lot of times it's hard to convey like a deep sadness, anger. But if a certain experience that you had in your life was traumatic or anything, you can pull that emotion from your own personal story, add it to the comic, and make it feel way more authentic. It'll connect and resonate with the readers a lot more. Alright, so structuring your idea. Every artist or like a creator, when they decide to make a comic, you get an idea, but like what do you do with it now? What's the next stage, right? It's usually fuzzy thoughts. Your mind is very fuzzy, unclear, it jumps back and forth. You have a lot of stuff in your mind. So the best thing you can do is write it down. Start writing it down, pick up a book, journal it down, and soak in it. Like, think about it. Think on it, write more, question it, talk about it with like your friends, people who are like-minded to you, and also people who are not on your same wavelength. They can maybe find flaws in your works, and collect a lot of feedback so that you better understand your own idea. If you don't understand your own idea, you probably won't be able to express it. Like, not probably, you definitely won't be able to express it the best way. Yeah, so soaking in it will, you start being able to identify the flaws in the idea. And this is the most important point. Whatever idea that you have, right, break it down to its simplest core element. Once you've done it, you can add layers to it, make it more complex, make it feel like so much bigger than it is. Because no matter what story you're telling, at its core it's very simple. It can be a love story, it can be anything, but at its core it's a small story, and later build upon it, add layers to it, make it feel more dramatic, more complex. So start by breaking it down to the simplest form. And again, understand your idea first. So these things help you understand the concept. So how detailed should your comic be? This is a question like I've been asked by other artists so many times, and it's a weird question because a lot of people associate detailing with style, right? Some people may have a simplistic style, meanwhile other artists might have a detailed, hatching, heavy artwork. But for comic, I don't think that's the case, and let me explain why. Comics are usually read way much faster than a novel because you breeze through pages. It's mostly art and a few text. So each panel usually has a specific emotion to convey, and if you're able to do that with a very minimal art, that's sufficient. You don't need to go overboard with it. And yeah, again, it comes back to the fact that comics are read fast, and the more detailed you add your artwork, it doesn't make sense because it's gonna get skipped through anyway. So the best way to use detailing is to use it sparingly as a tool. So you should start by understanding the pacing. Your story will have like an action heavy scene maybe, which will flip through quickly. You might not want to add a detail in a fast paced scene, but there might be more like a emotionally heavy scene where everything slows down as a conversation. When the story slows down, people read your comic slower. They want to dwell in it for longer, and that's when you increase the detail. It really works for an emotional scene. Maybe to zoom in on a character's face, show the specific emotion in a much more detailed way. So that's the best way to use detail. Alright, so finally, I'd like to talk about this thing, which is breaking the cycle. And you might be like, what is the cycle? It's a cycle that almost every Indian artist or comic artist goes through. And I've noticed this multiple times throughout my circle. So, it starts with Indian artists not being able to find other Indian artists to look up to or get inspired from. So they go to a lot of Western comics and Japanese comics for inspiration because the amount of work that the West and Japan has done is a lot bigger than India has been able to produce. So guess what? Artists get way too influenced from this Japanese and Western comics and end up creating generic looking comics that doesn't try to push the boundaries of comic visual storytelling. It stays in the same boundary of what existed before. They don't pull from our own roots, from our own culture, stuff like that. And when these kind of comics become more popular, the Indian artists who do try to push the boundaries, they get buried in that pile. And they don't get to see the limelight. And that, in the end, creates the loop, where again, beginner artists who want to get into comics don't find any quality comics to make. So yeah, I encourage everyone to break the cycle, like tell stories that are more rooted to our own Indian culture and push the boundaries of narrative storytelling. So thank you. That's it.
In your recent comic, read yesterday, both of the characters, there are three main characters, right?
Yeah.
The teacher and the father.
Right.
Both of them don't have pupils, right?
Yeah, so that's a intentional story element I added in my comic. So the two characters that you're talking about, the teacher and father, they are the abusers. In my story, I didn't draw the pupil for the abusers. And if you notice near the end of the comic, when our protagonist himself becomes an abuser, he loses the pupil himself. right? His eye becomes a blank. So it's a subtle way to communicate that idea. Again, I talked about the subtleties, right? Way to communicate the idea of him becoming the abuser without like blatantly shouting at him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Vishal, for that. I was sitting next to someone who